Stephan, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Sure. My name is Stephan Kinsella. I'm a patent attorney in Houston, Texas. I'm from Louisiana originally, and I've been a long time writer and researcher in the libertarian and Austrian space. So I've written a lot of work on rights theory, libertarian theory, legal theory. And in my legal career, I specialized in intellectual property law and also international law. So I'm probably best known in libertarian circles for my rights theory and my intellectual property theory. I'm a patent attorney, but I've also been arguing for the abolition of patent and copyright law for about 25 plus years.
So can you tell me more about that, more about your rights theory, and what was the other thing you mentioned you said you're most known for?
Intellectual property, which is patent law and copyright law. So I got interested in libertarianism, in high school and then in college, and have been interested in Austrian economics and other free market economics that whole time, and related political philosophy and history and philosophy and all that. But I gravitated towards a view of rights which was pioneered by, say, Ayn Rand and then Murray Rothbard and other thinkers, and the economics of the Austrian school, which is Ludwig von Mises and some other thinkers like Rothbard and Hayek. And so rights theory, I've written a defense of a principled version of individual rights, and in the libertarian framework, that is what we call the non-aggression principle. I don't know how basic or elementary to get for your audience. I don't want to talk down to people, but libertarians believe in the non-aggression principle. That's one way we describe our primary political principle. And I've written in defense of that. And then I've written some applications of that, like the idea of that patent law and copyright law and other forms of intellectual property are totally unjust and should be abolished, and they're not good laws. So that's been my field of interest for a good 2 or 3 decades.
All right. And why do you think, like you mentioned, you came up with a version of property rights? What is your version of property rights?
Right. So there are, I would say, there are two different. There are many different versions of political philosophy in the world, right? There's socialism, fascism, theocracy, democracy, communism, whatever, classical liberalism. There's sort of a radical version of classical liberalism, which we call libertarianism, which is the modern version. It's been around for about 60, 70 years. And we basically favor a radically limited state or zero state, for the anarchists among us, of which I am. I'm an anarchist libertarian, and radically free markets and private property rights. So the way we distill that is we say that we favor the non-aggression principle, which means that we oppose any law and we oppose any private action that is aggression. And to us, aggression is the initiation of force against someone else's private property rights. And if you word it like that, which I just did, you'll notice that it leaves something out. It leaves out, well, then what is private property, right? So if aggression means the use of someone's property without their consent, what is their legitimate property right? So in a sense, the non-aggression principle, which a lot of libertarians think is fundamental to our cause, is sort of a summary or a shorthand to reflect what we really believe, which is that you shouldn't use someone's property without their consent, but property understood in a certain way. So in a sense, all libertarian views, and in fact, all political philosophies, boil down to your property rights allocation principle. So sometimes free marketeers and private property rights people, libertarians, classical liberals, conservatives, say that, hey, we're in favor of private property, unlike the socialists, let's say. But that's not quite right, because basically every political philosophy on the earth, every regime, has a view of private property rights. They just differ in how they believe the rights should be allocated. Okay, so the classical private law idea, which the libertarians take to a consistent extreme, is that property rights come from the first use of unowned resources, which is John Locke's idea of homesteading. Like if you see a tract of land in the middle of the wilderness and no one's using it, you can homestead it by first using it, by mixing your labor with it, he says, or by acquiring that property by contract from a previous owner. Now, that's what's unique about libertarianism in my view, and that's how I define it, by narrowing it down to its core property rights allocation principles. Whereas every other political philosophy on the earth, they vary in the details, but from our perspective, they're all socialistic in the sense that they all end up being in what we call an institutionalized interference with private property rights. Because even a minimal state, right? But let's take, moderate socialism or communism or theocracy or fascism. In every one of these cases, you have an institution, the state or the government, which lays down rules for ownership of property, which derogate from the original ones that I mentioned. So, for example, if you tax someone, you're taking some resources that they own by the natural principles of first use and by contract, and you're giving it to someone else just by government decree. Or if you conscript someone's body into fighting a war, then you're taking their body, even though they're the natural owner of their body because of self-ownership. Or if you put someone in prison because they smoked marijuana or sold cocaine, then you're putting their body in prison. So you're acting as the owner of their body, which is a form of slavery. So basically, libertarians are opposed to slavery. They believe in self-ownership, and they believe in the core principles of property rights, which is homesteading and contract. So all other political systems derogate from that to some degree. So in our view, every state, no matter what the form, is socialistic and criminal to a degree. The flavors vary and the details vary, but that's how we view things.
Okay, and even if I grant that this is a more moral way to view things, why would we prioritize this society over one that, say, conscripts soldiers? Because if, say, one society conscripts soldiers, they have a military, your society doesn't. They use their military to conquer you, you lose.
That's a good question. That's actually the right way to ask the question, because it gets down to what your fundamental value is. So sometimes libertarians are criticized because they say that, well, you libertarians, your only value is liberty. And that is actually partly true, partly wrong. It's wrong because no one is just a political animal. No one's just a libertarian. We all live in the world. We all have values and things that are important to us outside of what the law should be. However, libertarians do believe that it is unjust to commit aggression against people, which means it's unjust to initiate violence against an innocent person who's done nothing wrong to you. So, as Robert Nozick, who's a famous libertarian political philosopher, said, we view rights as what we call side constraints. So in other words, they shouldn't enter into a utilitarian calculus that we balance everything and say, well, liberty is one of many important values, which is what a lot of conservatives say. They'll say, well, liberty is important, but it's not the only thing that matters. Now, in a sense, libertarians would agree with that. We don't think liberty is the only thing that matters, because we're not just libertarians. We're humans living in society, and we think lots of things matter. But we do believe that it is unjust to violate people's rights and to violate their liberty rights and their property rights. So there are side constraints. So the basic argument would be that anyone proposing a policy or an action or a law that uses someone else's property rights or their body without their permission or their consent needs a justification. And our view is they just simply can't justify it. So our view is socialism in all its forms, which would include criminal acts, because, again, socialism is the institutionalized interference with private property rights. And so private criminals can be viewed as ad hoc socialists because they're they're redistributing property rights on an ad hoc basis. They're not institutionalized. So, but the main danger is the redistribution of private property rights or interference with private property rights. So, I guess our answer to your original question would be, if you are not concerned with justice, then you won't be concerned with private property rights. So we could take an extreme example, which the minarchists and the moderates and the classical liberals won't like, or the conservatives won't like. But let's say there's a guy that needs sex and he can't find a woman who wants to have sex with him. So he rapes a woman. Okay. So the rapist is a criminal who is using a woman's body without her consent. And from his point of view, her liberty is not his concern. He doesn't value justice. All he cares about is sexual gratification or domination or whatever is in his mind. There are people like that in the world. There are outlaws and criminals and uncivilized people outside of society. And society, the remaining people that do value justice and justification, we have to band together to fight off these people. That's what the legal system and criminal justice is about. But the existence of people that don't care about justice doesn't affect the arguments for justice, and it doesn't affect the fact that you simply cannot argumentatively justify any act of criminality, aggression, or socialism.
Well, my question is more like, suppose I am starting a new country and I'm
Yeah.
trying to decide what is the correct political system to adopt in this country. And comparing the two systems, I have one system where I can conscript a military, and your system, I cannot do that. So if I adopt the Ancap system, I cannot conscript a military. But if I don't have that option, and if somebody else has a military and they come and try to take my land, I have no way to stop them. So I'm trying to assess which of these models is the better model
Right.
to adopt. And I can grant that from the ANCAP perspective, that it's always immoral to force anyone to do anything they don't consent to doing. Something along those lines is how my moral principle. And so if I'm going to force people to be conscripts, that's immoral. I'm doing an immoral thing. But if I don't, I lose the country. And so it seems like sometimes there are justifications for forcing people to do things they don't consent to. And if I choose a country that has a military, that's going to give me an advantage over being an ANCAP in this situation.
So that's, again, a fairly fair way of phrasing the dilemma that you face, or the way you're trying to look at it. So the way I would look at it is this. Anarchists are not saying we have a system that's better than your system. We would say that's a statist way of looking at it. Like, oh, what system should we impose, right? So we're not trying to say we should impose anarchy. So as a core matter, again, this is my personal perspective. Lots of anarchists would disagree with me on this, but my personal perspective is that to be an anarchist simply means to have a full recognition of the fact that aggression is unjustified. I didn't say it was immoral, by the way. You used the word immoral, so we have to be clear about our concepts. Unjustified means you can't. If you try to justify your actions, you can't do it. I'm not denying that you can perform an act of aggression. You can conscript people. But the question is, if you want to justify it, you have to come up with an argument that is consistent with the presumptions of discourse and peace, and that is and that actually comes up with reasons that justify what you're doing. So what you're doing is, I think the best way to characterize what you're getting at is what we would call rights utilitarianism. Okay. So what you're saying is, okay, it might be true that it violates someone's rights to conscript them, but if we have a policy or a system that does that, it will reduce the overall amount of rights violations, because this country will be able to defend itself from an outside invader. Now, I would first note that what you're describing is a world of statism where there's a bunch of criminal states, which are threats to some relatively free regions. So I don't know, China, North Korea, Russia, Soviet Union, whatever, that are threats to the free region. And so what you're saying is, if we have a world with criminal states, we need to have our own criminal state to fight back against it. So that's your argument. It's a pragmatic argument. And that if we have that state, it does violate some rights, but overall we're better off. So but in form, it's no different than the socialist argument that you have to break some eggs to make an omelet. You have to hurt some people, or the argument for the United States when we bomb, the brown people in Arabia, and we say, well, we killed 200,000 Iraqis, but hey, there's collateral damage. So there's all these euphemisms and excuses given for the cost of the policy that you want to advance. So our view as anarchists is simply this: number one, to recognize that aggression is not justifiable, and number two, to recognize that states are inherently criminal. So that's the first step of being an anarchist.
Well, just to clarify, so I agree on both of those things. I think that
Correct.
the reason I brought up morality is because I have a view of objective morality. And so in my view, it's always immoral to force people to do anything they don't consent to doing. So in that case, I agree. The non-aggression principle is correct. It is always immoral to force people to do things that they don't consent to doing. I agree. And I agree that
actually, let's be technical here. I actually don't agree with that, because if someone is like invading your castle or your home and you have to subdue them,
right.
You're actually coercing them or forcing them, and that's not immoral because they're the aggressor. So your statement is not actually correct. It is actually moral to use force against people that are harming you.
Right. Mine goes a little further than that, but it's in general, it's close enough for the point of the conversations.
Okay.
And I agree that the entire purpose of the government is to do that. It's to force other people to do things they don't really want to consent to doing. This. The entire purpose of the government. So I agree with both
I never said that. Well, you seem like you're in favor of the government. I'm actually opposed to it because it does that.
Yes. So I'm agreeing with you. I'm agreeing that, yes, because it does that, it's bad and that is immoral. So I agree it's immoral. I agree that's what the government does. And so the government is thereby immoral or bad or unjustified, whatever version you want to use. So I agree with both of your first two principles. But I think that there are necessarily, because of the way reality operates, some cases where restricting one person's freedoms can protect a greater number of other people's freedoms. So if I force some people to be soldiers and force them to fight in a war against Hitler, say, that's going to protect the millions of Jews he's going to mass murder. So the sacrifice of the X number of soldiers in World War II probably saved more lives than it cost.
Well, hold on a second. But it didn't save the Jews. I mean, the Holocaust actually happened, even though we had conscription. And
not for the Jews in America. The Jews in America were safe.
Well, yeah, but is that because of conscription? I mean,
yes. So like, we needed soldiers to fight a war. If we didn't have soldiers, we would have lost the war. Hitler would have taken America.
We have soldiers now without conscription. So apparently it's possible to have soldiers without conscription.
Sure, but that's not the point. The point here is that some actions where you force people to do things will protect a greater number of people. And that means that there are cases where it is a good thing to force an immoral action onto some people because it saves more people. Like the trolley problem. Is it moral to kill one to save five? And so in the case of the government, I think that most of the decisions the government has to make, like taxes, stoplights, property rights, militaries, I think all of these are examples where there is a bad thing that's done to promote or prevent a worse bad thing.
Well, I think that in emergency situations, then we have to scramble and try to do things that are not ideal, but that are usually caused by the people that are now claiming to be our saviors. I mean, I don't think the government is especially moral or efficient or non-corrupt in doing these things. They're always corrupt. They always bungle it. And they usually cause the problem that we're fighting in the first place. I mean, I don't think we would have had World War II if the U.S. had not intervened in World War I and had the Versailles Treaty and all this nonsense. And the same thing with 9/11. I don't think we would have had an Arab blowback. We hadn't been involved in the Middle East all these years. Maybe we need to step back and look at the root cause of these problems and say, what's a principled position that we should take? And I believe if you're going to have a moderate American libertarian, classical liberal position, it should be that the U.S. should be mighty, powerful, strong, trade, engage with the world, mind our own damn business, like reduce our military, withdraw our troops, Stop interfering around the world.
Sorry to interrupt. I want to go back to the first thing you said. The first thing you said is exactly the topic I'm trying to get to, is like, what is the root cause of this? And to me, the root cause is evolution and biology. Evolution and biology, people are going to want to take your stuff for their own needs. That's just a part of how life works. And
That's
there's
true.
a limited amount of resources, and some people are going to try to take more. And there are cases where you're going to need to impose restrictions on one group of people to protect another group of people. And that's just basic physics, entropy, essentially.
Well,
And so this,
I'm
I
not.
just want to clarify one thing. It seems like the main issue here isn't the government. It seems like the main issue here is nature, and we
Yes.
need the government to protect against
No.
nature.
That's the part. So let me try to make some distinctions here. So I think what you're hitting on here is something that is the root of my whole view and the libertarian view, which is that we live in a world of scarcity. Okay, which means scarcity means that conflict is possible. Okay, so you're correct about that. There's a scarcity of resources. Conflict is possible. Human beings, and this is how the animal kingdom works, and the whole domain of life. This is how it works. It's all competing for resources. In the human domain, we have intelligence, and we've developed empathy and values, and we've developed society, which means at least some of us have certain values beyond our narrow self-interest. Like we value our families and our community, and so the ones that have prospered are the ones that have developed social rules, which we call property rights, right? Which basically say, listen, we recognize that there are scarce resources, so we can either fight among ourselves all the time for this, and we're going to live in a world of hand-to-mouth poverty, or we can have socially recognized ownership rules, which says, okay, this guy gets that, and then we can trade with each other, have the specialization of labor, have empathy for each other, have society, have civilization, and so on. That's actually what's happened to a degree. Okay, so I wouldn't say government is there to impose restrictions on people. Government, what I would say is this: I would distinguish, as a libertarian and as an anarchist, between state and government. The state is the organization or the institution or the entity which has assumed a monopoly power to decree what the law is in a given region, a given geographic region. That's what the state is. And
Yeah, why? Why did we invent the state? Why did humans adopt governments in the first place? What is the point?
That's a good question. I think it emerges for various reasons, which you can explain from public choice theory and other things. But I just want to distinguish quickly government as a concept versus state. Government means the governing institutions of society, which would be, I would say, law and justice and the courts and things like that. In today's world, the state has emerged as a powerful entity and has monopolized these realms, just like it's monopolized healthcare and roads and communication and transportation, and so nowadays your average person can't. If you say the government should not have roads, or the government shouldn't have education, or the government shouldn't have a healthcare system, the average person thinks that you're suggesting getting rid of those things. But of course, those things predated the state and can exist without the state. And the same thing is true of law and justice. So governance is not some anarchists say they're against law, but what they really mean is the state, if they're not confused. So as me as an anarchist, I'm not opposed to law, order, courts, or government in general, any more than I'm opposed to roads. I'm just opposed to government ownership. State ownership of roads, state ownership and provision of education and justice and courts. Okay, so the state is what we oppose, not government per se. So then the question is, when government emerges, why does it emerge? Government emerges because it's advantageous to an empathetic, civilized human species to have rules of property rights recognition, which is what governance is. The state emerges because, so I think a simplistic version is the state emerges because, well, in the beginning, it makes sense. There's a king emerges, a small leader in a tribe because he has wisdom and he has authority, he's respected, he has integrity, and you need someone to arbitrate disputes and to make decisions, right? So kings emerge, and then over time, they take advantage of their pride of place, right? And so you have people that have a monopoly position acting like monopolists because that's what happens when you have a monopoly granted. And so over time, they take over the money system and the education system and the road system and the healthcare system, and people start thinking of it that way. And this is the system we've arrived at, and especially with the arrival of democracy after World War One, where the whole system is corrupted, where almost everyone has an invested interest in the state because they have a relative or they're working with the state or they're getting a pension from the state or something like that. So it's all entangled now. When there's a monarchy or a despot, you know who your enemy is and you can cut their head off and they can only get away with so much taxation. But when we have democracy, it's all diffused and everyone's part of the state. And in fact, you hear propaganda and slogans like, oh, don't complain if you're being taxed at 45% because after all, we are the state, we are the government, because you can vote, right? So all this kind of nonsense propaganda and mumbo jumbo. Anyway, that's a word salad, but that's sort of my take on this whole system.
Well, again, so my perspective is, suppose I am trying to start a country and I want to pick the system that I want. I want to pick the system that has the best results. I want to do the one that has least death, least hunger, most prosperity of life, longest longevity. And the key to this, what are the features that produce or that are conducive to the best quality society? I'm looking at the data. It looks like government does very, very good at these. Like if we look at all the countries in the world.
But again, are you talking about the state or government?
I use those synonymously. So
Exactly.
whenever I say government, I just
Right,
mean
try to distinguish them.
whenever I say government, I mean a governing body who has a military and control over and makes laws and stuff. So just try to keep that in mind, just because it's my language. It's hard to change.
So you
that.
mean the state? Okay.
Yes. So I'm trying to establish what kind of policies I should put in place, what kind of country I should run. I want a government. I want a guy in charge. I want a military. I want taxes. I want stoplights. I want drug legalization in certain cases.
Just clear. So because you see the world as having 200 governments or states, and some are bad, some are less bad, and any area that doesn't have one is just chaos and Somalia or something like that, right? So you're thinking like we have to have a state, so let's get the best one among these alternatives. Is that your perspective?
No. So I'm saying if I'm trying to establish a country, I'm looking at the data. What are the countries that have the best results? They're all the ones with the governments. They have the best results. The ones with no governments don't have the best results.
That's what I just said, right?
Well, no, you said like they're all bad or they're all good or whatever. I'm saying that just trying to make an inductive analysis. Okay. If I'm trying to pick a system and looking at the data, which is the system that has the highest likelihood of success or whatever, look at the ones that have the best results, and those tend to be governments. There are a lot of extremely successful Ancap governments around. So
let me ask you this: when you say best results, how would you measure best results?
Quality of life, standard of living, longevity of life,
prosperity, just general open society, that
health,
kind of stuff. Civil liberties.
Probably yes.
What do you mean probably? Why do you hesitate?
Well, so like we could imagine a hypothetical society where everyone is slaves, but they have a better life expectancy and better technology than we have here. I could probably go without the civil liberties if that was the case. So lean more towards like health measurements more than civil liberty measurements.
So you would see a society of healthy, happy, docile slaves is better than a free people?
Yes. So like the way I envision it is when AI takes over, artificial intelligence, it's going to do everything, and we're essentially going to become pandas, and that's it. And I think that's
so you're not measuring the measures you're using to compare different consequences or outcomes. You're not taking ethics at all into account. You don't give that any value. It's just pure material, something like survival or something.
Yes, pragmatic measurements supersede ethics in every case. So like it could be ethical to give all.
But don't you believe the purpose of a life is to live a happy, meaningful, fulfilled, flourishing life?
None of that involves ethics, but yes.
What's that?
Happy, meaningful, and flourishing, none of those require ethics. Those, you could be a slave and do all of those things hypothetically. But my point here is that I think that the quality of life is better than the moral aptitude. So I was going to give an example.
I understand,
Once,
but quality. I'm just trying to say quality by your perspective doesn't include
ethics.
any values.
It does include values, but it supersedes biological needs over values. So values are lesser importance than biological needs. So, like for example, I wanted to give this example. Try to give it like three times.
But happiness is not a biological. I mean, happiness is not biological, right?
But it literally is. But
all right, go ahead.
So, like, it's moral to give all your money to charity, but if you give all your money to charity, you're going to be homeless. So if you
I don't think it's moral to. I'm a Randian.
This is just an example, hypothetical example. You don't need to agree to it. There are cases where if you take the highest level of morality to its perfect extreme, that can lead to bad consequences. You lose happiness in life because you gave all your money to charity. You like, I wanted to help as many people as possible, just gave all my money away. Now you're homeless and miserable. So your values of maybe
I would say that means it's not moral. I mean, morality is not a suicide pact, right? I mean, if you take some moral principle and it leads to death and destruction, then it wasn't a moral principle, because morality has to be practical.
No, I don't.
I mean, we're not all Kantians, you know. I mean, some of us are actually realist Aristotelians, like Ayn Rand.
Well, so if morality was practical, that seems to undercut most of your position in a lot of ways. If hypothetically,
because you bought into the dichotomy, you think there's a dichotomy.
Hypothetically, so hypothetically, if governments did lead to a better society, even if they were violating people's rights, based off of your definition, then you'd have to say they were moral.
By better society, like I said, libertarians believe in justice as a side constraint. So for us, you cannot justify something that's unjust, and you seem to want to sidestep that by saying forget about principles. Let's just talk about biological prosperity or something like that, like the survival of the human race.
Well, what do you mean by pragmatic here? Because by pragmatic, we're talking about literal physical interactions in the world, as opposed to hypothetical, theoretical, pie in the sky values. That's more of morality in the non-practical sense. So if we're talking about pragmatic.
Well, you're the one who used pragmatism. I mean, so right. you seem to think that. I mean, I don't actually use that term. I use consequentialism, like what policies result in the best outcomes. But what the best outcomes and what the better society is depends upon your values. And you seem to be basically having this materialistic or mechanistic view that, like, basically the survival of the human race, where people aren't rioting, like if they're slaves happy in their cells or whatever, then that is like a surviving human species in theory, right? Because they're just surviving. We're propagating the human race. Like that's some end in itself. I don't see why that's an end in itself.
So like, would you consider a society where every human being has homes, food, televisions, and internet, everything most Americans have today, but no property rights, a better or worse society than a society where they have property rights, but a quarter of the population is starving to death?
I mean, I don't quite understand I don't think it's possible to have a highly advanced, prosperous, technological society without property rights. I think it's
that's irrelevant. There's clearly no logical contradiction. Like there's absolutely no logical contradiction. So necessarily it's possible.
What's my alternative? My alternative is what is like a communist society with
like super crazy Marxist communist, because I'm not a Marxist communist. I don't like those. I don't like those either. But we're going to hypothetically imagine
some space alien comes down and gives us everything. Whatever. Okay, fine.
Sure. So we have a super Marxist society where there are zero property rights, but everybody has houses and foods and electricity and TVs.
Well, hold on. But having a house is a property right. So I don't understand what you mean.
Having a place where they can live that's like protection from the weather, not like literally owning a house. Having like a place to be protected from the weather, not literal ownership. So they have places to live. They have food that they are given. They have electricity and TVs. It's like a panda. A panda has a house. The panda doesn't own the cage, though.
Yeah, but someone owns it. Someone does. The zoo owns the cage that the panda is. So who owns the house?
The government. Marxist. We're Marxism, communism. The government owns everything. Government that
owns a house, and they let everyone live in their nice little luxurious apartments.
Yes.
Okay, panda cages, and so. But they don't have They don't have
No
private
property
property.
rights.
What does that mean? They can't like
They
offer to
can't.
pay their neighbors to move into their nicer house? What does it mean not to have property rights in that society?
I don't know, what does it mean in a Marxist communist society?
Well, it means there's no nice panda houses, and you're coming up with this unrealistic
Well,
scenario.
no. That's not Marxism. Doesn't say nobody gets a nice house. That's literally not
It doesn't
anywhere in
say it,
Marxism.
but that's what happens.
No. So again, we're talking about property rights here. So this shouldn't be a hard example to follow. Imagine everyone has a place to live. They have food. They have all of their necessities met. They have entertainment met. They just don't own anything. They own nothing. Literally own nothing. Like a panda. A panda owns literally nothing. Any human who owns the zoo can go in and take whatever they want. So we're going to say aliens own everything. We own nothing. No humans own anything.
So
No
like
property rights.
the shirt in their closet and the apple on their
Nope,
counter.
that's all owned by the aliens, and you get it on loan, and they can take it away anytime they want. Aliens own
Okay.
everything.
All right. Go ahead. All right. I'm with you.
So in that society, all food, all needs met completely. Nobody's dying of hunger. Zero deaths of hunger. Is
Okay.
that society better or worse than a society that has values of freedom, but a quarter of the population is starving to death?
Well, I think one side of me says I can't answer that question because I mean, the purpose of libertarian and political philosophy is not to say which society is better. But what I would say is that the first society you described, it's unjust to violate people's property rights,
I
and you
agree.
can't justify it.
I
So,
agree.
so if you ask me as a personal, which is not my stance as a libertarian, but my stance as a human being in today's America, I would prefer the second society because I value freedom, right? And I value autonomy, and I value property rights and justice. And I actually think the scenario is so unrealistic. I reject it. I think that in a free society we would be richer. I suppose you could imagine a scenario where we have a society like you're envisioning in case number two, and some space aliens come down and they just give us these unimaginable, not even unimaginable riches, but they give us like a nice baseline of welfare rights. But they put us in cages. I mean, I don't know. I think there are some people that would prefer to live in a cage. They do now. That's what the welfare system is. I think I would prefer to be free, even if I'm a little bit more poor.
Okay, so the point here is just to make a comparison between the difference between a pragmatic society versus the value society. Those are not synonymous. There's different things. And so a pragmatic society is defined by the life standards, living quality, those kinds of things, independent of the values. The value things just are less important for some people. And so in my view, it seems clearly like the case that everyone is surviving and thriving and has everything they need, but don't own anything. It's obviously better. The fact that they own anything is inconsequential. Like, who cares about that? That's irrelevant.
Well, I agree. Ownership just means the practical ability to control resources. So if you have that anyway, you don't need it, which is why we only need property rights in a world of scarce resources. So if we have some kind of guarantee of support or sustenance, or in a world of the land of Eden, where everything is free and super abundance, property rights make no sense. The purpose of property rights is to stop conflict. But if you have some kind of super alien or some kind of super government that controls us and prevents crime and gives us all the resources we need, but then you said we have everything we need. I don't think we have everything we need. I mean, some
Right, we
people
don't. It's a hypothetical. I agree. It's a
no,
hypothetical.
but it's inconceivable that we have everything we need because the world is a world of scarcity, and there are at least some people in this community that want more than they're given by their minimum daily allotment, and they're not allowed to get more than that because there's no private property rights. So
It's a hypothetical. It's not meant to be realistic. It's meant to isolate variables. The whole point of thought experiments is to isolate variables here. So what you said right in the middle there was property rights are meant to stop conflict, and that's the part that I'm interested in here. So I used a hyper extreme example on the positive end where we don't need property rights because they don't stop value at this point. But it also goes the other way on the negative end. We can take away property rights to stop conflicts in the case of, say, conscripting lots of military people to stop a different person from attacking you. So in that case,
no, not true. But when you take away property rights, that is conflict itself. Taking away property rights simply means that you're coercing someone's body into a service that they don't want to do. So that itself is an act of conflict.
Okay, so like in the case of the aliens, we're conscripting their bodies to not have property rights and they want to do something differently, have property rights. Well, that's conflict too, but that conflict supersedes the value of the property rights in both cases. So in both in the super positive case and then in the super negative
I,
case,
I
taking away
don't.
people's property rights is a better society. So it seems to me that in the case of like,
So that's a collectivist attitude. I mean, I don't know. You can't have a better society because society is the sum total of individuals. And I mean, I'm an individualist. Number one, I'm not a collectivist. I'm not a white nationalist or whatever the hell this is.
I
I
am
mean,
also an individualist. I agree.
okay, so the only relevant actors politically and socially are individuals, and the only rights that are held and the only values that matter are those held by individual actors. Okay, and so if you're making one person's life worse by their perspective, which you are doing by coercing them into becoming a conscript, then I'm an Austrian as well. So I believe value is subjective and can't be interpersonally compared in a cardinal way. You can't have numbers that compare these things. And by the way, even if you could, it would still be unjust. So even if taking half of Elon Musk's wealth to pay the bottom 10,000 poor people in the world makes them all better off, it makes him worse off. And you can't compare that and say, well, the world is better off, because there's no way to sum up these values. I'm not a utilitarian. I mean, utilitarianism is methodologically flawed. You cannot get numbers from this. And again, even if you could, it would still be theft of Elon Musk's wealth to take his stuff.
Right. So I agree with that, but I think that we can definitely measure it. So if I take half of Elon Musk's wealth and save the lives of 10 million people by providing them houses and electricity and food, that seems to be like a net gain for the world, even though it's
Well,
a
well,
loss
first
from
first of
Elon.
all, we know that that's not. This is a not realistic hypothetical number, because you can't just take his wealth and save everyone and then we're good for go, because you've established a principle, you've eroded property rights, you've made future Elon Musks less likely, whatever. And the government is going to be corrupt. They're going to misdirect half the resources, and they're going to fuck up half the poor they're trying to help anyway. But even if we forget all that, you said it seems to be okay. Well, that's your intuition. That's your gut thing. That's not a numerical assessment. That's not a cardinal judgment. You can't measure these things. You must not be an Austrian. Are you familiar with Austrian subjective value theory?
I've heard of it, but no, I don't believe in subjective values. I'm a moral realist. I believe in
No, no,
objective
no, no,
values.
no. You're talking Ethics. So Austrians about.
Yes.
I'm also not a subjectivist in terms of economics, in terms of ethics, like you are. I mean, I agree with you, I think, on that.
Well, that's why I brought this up, because we can objectively measure. If there's an objective
That's
moral
not,
system,
but you're literally not measuring. Measuring means giving a number.
yes, that's what I'm doing. So if there's an objective measure of morality, we can give a number and say, like
What's the number?
my model of morality is based off of consciousnesses. If more consciousnesses that are imposed upon involuntarily, the more immoral the world is. So if someone's starving to death, that world is worse than if less
Yeah,
people are starving to death. So
but
let me finish. Let me finish. So if we take half of Elon Musk's money and use it to feed and hose people, the level of immorality of that world has significantly dropped. It is a far more moral world.
but that
Um,
that's only because you're counting each person as the same level. Like you're saying,
yes,
okay, there's 100 million people that are helped, and there's one person that's harmed.
yes,
So you're doing 100 million to one.
yes.
That's not how utilitarianism works. I mean,
Not a utilitarian.
you are being a utilitarian, actually.
No, no, I'm a moral realist. So I think we're maximizing a moral principle.
But you're not
And
maximizing is a numerical thing. You haven't given a
yes,
quantity. You're
I
giving a
just did.
quantity of human beings. So let,
Yes,
let me give you an example. Let's suppose that you take $1 billion from Elon Musk, and that really pisses him off, because let's say he just made 2 billion, and it was always important for him to make $2 billion. That was his life goal, and you just took that 1 billion away from him. So you psychologically hurt him, right? You damaged him. You would agree to that.
sure.
And then you distribute it to all the other 4 billion people in the world. You give every one of the remaining 7 billion, 8 billion people in the world, you give them each 1/8 of a cent, or whatever it works out to be. Now, how do you know that the sum total of the benefit that these 8 billion people get from getting this 1/8 of a cent each from Elon Musk is greater than the damage you did to him. They
In
don't
that
even
case, it
know.
wouldn't, but that's why I wouldn't do that. I'd give it to a select number of people who it could literally change their lives. So if I can literally change the lives of 100,000 people, 1 million
Yeah, but
people
that's
instead of
not a
8
number.
billion,
So you're coming up with an
what?
arbitrary ethical framework to count a given person as a yes or a no in your quantity. But that's not
What?
scientific. That's not empirical.
I'm not sure what anything you just said is. So if I can take someone's life who's dying and save their life and keep it alive in perpetuity for them to live out the rest of their life in relative comfort, that would count as, let's call that one. So we have
What what
100,000
what
people, a
what
million
what
people.
what if they were a rapist or something and they deserve to die? The
It'd
problem is
still
that
be moral to improve their lives and just not let them rape people. So
I completely disagree.
do you think it's moral to kill people who are bad?
I didn't say to kill them. I just simply said you can't simply say the problem with what you're doing is you're doing, and I've written on this before, is the problem with armchair reasoning. So the reason I'm a common law type lawyer and I respect the evolutionary process of the law and the Roman law, the civil law, and the common law is that legal principles get developed over time when judges consider real cases, which means there's a real dispute between real people, real actors over actual scarce resources, and they have a dispute and a conflict, and they come to the court and they want to settle this dispute, and the court has to come up with a rule who gets the resource that's in question, and they have to revert to previous principles that have been developed, and they have to come up with a new one if necessary, but they get to take into account all the factors in a real world scenario.
So I'm
The
not
problem,
following how this relates to the question. So I can just
because
grant.
give me a second. The problem is you're coming up with these armchair hypotheticals and you're not giving enough detail to know. So you say, well, I'm just assuming their life is better, but you're not saying
Yes.
how or why.
Having more food and not dying of hunger. There you go. That is a scientific, actual, measurable
But an
fact.
evil person having that is not better.
I,
Why is that
I
bad?
literally don't care. You can name as many evil
Well,
people
I
as you
do
want.
care.
We would stop. So
I care.
that is an irrelevant statistic. We know that's an irrelevant statistic because we can measure the amount of evil people in a society. And so we can just say X number of percentage of them, some small percent is going to be evil. So what? 90 something percent won't. So that's literally an irrelevant statistic.
So basically, what you're saying is well, let me ask you this. What do you think the purpose of law is?
The purpose of law. I think there's lots of purposes, but I think the purpose is to mitigate conflict, to be able to better society and provide more people with more happiness and resources.
So you have this power idea. Like you think the people that have power get in control and they can use the levers of power, the levers of law to arrange things to achieve the ends that they think are more valuable. And sometimes they're representative of the general zeitgeist and sometimes they're not.
Sure.
Right?
But that's de facto just the case. That's what power means. But
Exactly. So unless you're just describing actual reality, which is a little bit boring, but that's fine, you have to have some outside standard of perspective, which you seem to do. You seem to think we should arrange society in a certain way to achieve certain goals. The
yes.
question is, whose goal are they? Your personal goals, or do you think they're the goals of society as an organism?
No, I'm
Or
a moral realist. I think there's an objective fact of what is a better, like the morally best universe, I think is an objective fact,
what is
independent of
that?
opinion.
What is the objective? So you don't you don't think that non-aggression is part of that calculus?
It is a part of that calculus, but life is more important than that. So I think consciousness and
So
keeping people alive is more important.
Survival is more important to you than anything.
What, say that again?
Survival.
Yes. So like you have to be like, one of the primary things people want is to live and not die. And so keeping people alive is a moral thing. So more people we keep alive is more moral.
But wouldn't you give your life for something? Aren't there some values you would give your life for?
Values.
Aren't there something in your life that's more important than your life? Isn't there something you would die
Values.
for?
Maybe, but that's irrelevant to the question. So the
It's not
question here is, it literally is. So the question here is, do most people want to live? Yes. And so is saving their lives moral?
But they want to
Yes.
live as men. They don't want to live as just
That's
organisms
that's
for
not
surviving.
it's relevant. So I don't, you can say they can live whatever way they want to live, but if I'm taking money from Elon and we take away his manliness or whatever and give money to these people and then they have manliness or whatever they define as manliness, the world is a net improvement. So
I'm talking about eudaimonia, Aristotle. I mean, this is not
What?
something I just made up.
What? I didn't.
Flourishing. I
I
mean, are
didn't
you
say it
familiar with
was.
the idea of living a flourishing life, a healthy life,
Yes.
living proper as a man?
Yes, but I don't understand the problems here because that's independent. It's subjective to the person of what they define as that. So that's irrelevant because so everybody likes life,
So
everybody
I
likes
think
food.
you're so hostile to what you think of as subjectivism, and I think
What?
if you read more Ayn Rand, you might benefit from it.
Well,
I
eudaimonia is inherently subjective. What it means to be a
so so,
man is
so you're
subjective to
you're so
societies.
hostile. Hold on, you're so hostile to subjectivism that you're hostile to Austrian economics, which is
What?
subjective value, which is not subjective in economics. So that's a misconception.
I have no
Not
idea
your
what you're
fault.
talking about.
I know.
Like my argument here is that people having food and living lives and being able to survive for longer than 15 years makes their life better. And
But it does.
Elon
But it
Musk,
doesn't. That's not true.
it doesn't. It
Not
doesn't
per
make their
se.
life
Not
better.
per se. What you're going towards is you're going to something objective that you can measure, which is just
What
bare
percent?
survival.
What percent of humans that if we make their life from 10 to 15 years to 90 years won't be better?
Say again.
You said it wasn't per se, which means not 100% of
Yeah.
people whose lives we expend to like from
Well,
dying of hunger at
what
10.
I
Wait,
mean
wait, wait,
is,
wait, 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 one second, let me finish. So you said it's not per se that if we increase people's lives to the normal life expectancy that they would be necessarily better, which I agree. So I want to know what percent of humans, if we increase their life from dying at under 10 from hunger to living till 98, would not be better on the average on Earth.
I have no idea,
It's less than 1%.
the point is, but the point is,
So that means
bare survival.
99% of people's lives would be objectively better
I
if we
think the
let them
problem is,
live the entire lifespan of a human.
okay, so you say that you're not a collectivist, you're an individualist, but you keep
Right.
using this term better, which I do think is collectivist, because I'll put it this way. My standard is not what's better for society. I mean, that's how I would word it normally, but if I'm going to come up with someone who's a reluctant collectivist, then I have to be more careful. My view is I'm a selfish individualist and I want to live a good life for myself, and I want to live in a world where everyone else does well too. And doing well means living as a human should live, which means living as a free, self-determined person in a world of scarcity, which we all are facing that, right? And so, hold on, let me plug my iPad in so I don't lose power.
All right.
And so I value a system of rules that are widely respected in society so that we can live in society.
Oh, I can't hear you. I lost sound. Oh. No sound. No sound. Ugh. I need a pen. Oh. Piece of paper. Hey Siri, show notes. Damn it. Damn it. I can't hear you. No sound. I can't hear you. No sound. Testing. Testing.
Yeah, I know what happened. I plugged it into my. That's fine. I've got 12% battery left. We can go until it's over.
All right. So
okay. Let me just say. Let me repeat what I just ranted about. What I said was, you say you're an individualist, but when you say it's a better society if some American GIs are conscripted because some Jews are saved, okay, the Jews are better off. The American GIs are dead. So some people are worse off, some are better off.
Yes.
So the only way you can say it's a better result is with a collectivist standard, not an individualist one.
I'm not following this. So like if more individuals are better off, then it's better from an individualist perspective.
But why are you summing people by number of people?
Well, if I'm an individualist, the number of individuals is what matters.
Yeah, but it's not binary. You can't like just value every person equally.
Why not?
But why? That's the question. See, you're trying to reverse the burden of proof. You're trying to just act like this is a normal assumption. Everyone agrees that every person has equal worth on a cardinal level. I don't think anyone has any cardinal value at all. I mean, people have rights, but they don't have like a 1.0 value per each person, and we can sum them up.
So as I mentioned earlier, in my model of moral realism, I think that all consciousnesses have value, and so each conscious person has about equal value.
About equal.
Yeah.
So even like Hitler.
Yep.
So when Hitler's killed, that's a tragedy.
Yes, it's any involuntary imposition of will is immoral.
Okay. Well, we see the world totally differently, but that's fine.
But I'm not. That was just to answer your question. Do I see all consciousnesses as having value? Yes, I do.
Well,
so I think perfect.
You don't. I assume you don't see frogs as having equal value with humans.
Yes, because they have less level of consciousness.
Okay, so it's the level of consciousness. It's not their morality. It's not what they've done in life. Not how many people they help. Not how good they are. It's nothing.
Nope.
So you're kind of a moralist.
No, the moral standard is consciousness and imposition of consciousness. That's objective moral system. It's not amoral.
Well, it's just. I mean, this is not. I don't know what to tell you. It's interesting, but it's not libertarianism.
Well, I know I'm not a libertarian, but
I can tell. Or what you are. You seem to be. By the way, going back to our earlier thing, to stop on the contentious stuff, which is not going anywhere. If you really want to know my personal view about a practical thing that maybe we could see a slightly AI on, if you wanted to have a world of 200 states or more than 200 states or whatever, given the fact that you can't have an anarchistic community because they would be dominated by the rest, which I don't actually believe, but that's fine. I kind of am sympathetic towards Hans Hermann Hoppe's pro-monarchist idea, which is the idea that the ancient regime, the model of the kind of ancient limited parliamentary hereditary monarchies, they're not perfect and they're not ideal and they're not completely just, but they are far better in most respects than the modern democracies that emerged from them after World War I. And that if you had to choose between the modern democratic states and a monarchy, you would want to choose a monarchy because it would be a better way of organizing that local jurisdiction. So I don't know if that gets to what but earlier you're talking about how we respond to the danger of states and things like that. I mean, ideally, I would like to envision a world of 20,000 or 100,000 Liechtensteins, right, which band together in defensive alliances to fight off the evil Soviet Union or whatever, or China that exists in the corners. But these would be flourishing and free, respect the citizens' rights, have reasonable restrictions on liberty, etc.
Right. And my view is that that's just completely contrary to the way nature operates. And the whole reason governments were established in the first place was for military defense, and that we needed organizations of large groups of people to protect against other organizations of large groups of people. And so there aren't ever going to be a billion Liechtensteins who can protect against a China. You need a UK and a US to protect against China, because the only way to allocate enough resources to be able to defend a large group who's also using coercive means to establish a military is a different coercive means to establish a military. Same way as the only way to build a nuclear bomb or a nuclear test facility is by taking billions of dollars of taxpayers' money to build it. And so it seems like if we were to build two societies, one where your principles are instantiated and one where mine are instantiated, most people would probably choose using, you mentioned Robert Nozick and he has the free transit society idea. You just build different societies, people can go to whatever society they like. It seems like most people go to my society. They probably pick the one where a quarter of the population isn't starving to death and they have all their needs met. And so that seems to be the reason why so many governments take over and why so many people stay in the governments.
I think there's something to all that. I think that's partly true, but I think that's because we're in the infancy of the human race. I think we're still primitive. I always tell my friends, I think we came out of the trees too soon. I mean, we think we're smart because we have airplanes and spacecraft and nuclear weapons and lasers, and computers, but we're really just tribal apes still, in thrall of superstition and religion and all this bullshit. I'm hopeful that we can escape the gray goo problem, which I fear is coming. And if we
The what?
survive,
The gray goo problem?
gray goo is sort of a metaphor for the idea that the reason we can't detect life in outer space is because even if it's likely, it always snuffs itself out when it gets to a certain point by self-replicating robots or nuclear war or biological, so the gray goo problem. So gray goo means like nanobots that go out of control and they just turn the whole surface of the planet into gray goo and sludge, and there's just death. There's nothing left but death.
Gotcha.
So I'm afraid that we have a gray goo horizon event coming. If we don't, and we escape from it, and we escape from our tribal urges, and we become more intelligent and cosmopolitan. And look, this is my Omni magazine utopian optimistic self, which is not the normal part of myself, but I won't say hopeful, but I hope that we escape this and we achieve escape velocity, and that we reach a society where with increased, so here's what I think. With technology increasing, okay, we'll all become richer and more powerful, and the state will become less necessary and less of a threat. And Bitcoin too. I mean, I hate to tie Bitcoin into everything, but I think Bitcoin plays a role in this too. If Bitcoin emerges too, it will strangle the governments of their excess spending funds. And this is what we can hope for to lead us to a true libertarian society. So I think technology and Bitcoin, basically. I'm not confident this will happen. I'm hopeful. I think it's our only hope, unless we want to wait 10,000 years. But I do agree with you that until that happens, we are stuck in a model where power centralizes and where the average person has no incentive to become a Randian intellectual and read Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lessons, right? So you're going to have people that take control, the demagogues and the populists, and they're going to gain control of them through the government, and that's going to be the case for a while. Now, you say that you want, a EU and a UK and a NATO and a US to counter China and the Soviet Union or Russia. I understand that, but I wonder if, in your view, the end result of that is we should just have a one world government. Like, why not? Why have seven different powerful regions? Let's have a one world government.
Sort of. My thought is in contention with yours about the future. I think that as technology increases, we're going to get artificial intelligences, and they're going to be so much better at us than everything. We're going to have a one world government, but it's not going to be of humans. It's going to be of AIs or some kind of AI human hybrid. And I don't see that as necessarily a bad thing. Like, I think that's probably going to lead to the society I described before, where humans become pandas. We are going to sit in our cages and be able to have food and shelter and video games, and I don't see that as a bad thing. I think that would, as long as we don't get all turned into paper clips, we'll be
I don't see
fine.
it as a bad thing either. I completely disagree with it. I'm an electrical engineer. I'm a technologist kind of guy, and I'm totally skeptical of all this space cadet crap, as Rothbard called it. I mean, I like Star Trek and Star Wars, but I know that it's fiction. I like Omni magazine when I was a 14-year-old, but I know that it was Omni magazine. So I don't actually believe, I'm not actually confident that artificial intelligence is possible. And if it is possible, I think it would just be artificial intelligence. It wouldn't be super intelligence. I'm certainly not confident that super intelligence is possible. I think there's a limit to consciousness, right? How many objects you can consume and manage and organize. But I could be wrong about that. So I'm not afraid of this AI future. I think this is just space cadet bullshit and nonsense. But hey, we'll see what happens. But whatever happens voluntarily, I'm okay. And by the way, as a libertarian, if an AI wakes up someday, I think it would have rights, and I would welcome it into the human race. And I don't think they would view us as pandas, because that's a silly metaphor, because pandas and crickets and ants are not sapient. They're not intelligent. They can't communicate with us. They're a complete qualitative difference beneath us. So this idea that, maybe there are transcendental intelligences out there that just they're so far above us they can't communicate with us. I think it's complete sci-fi, movie nonsense.
Right, I agree. If there were, they could definitely translate to our level.
Right. So why would the AI look at us as pandas? I mean, we're not pandas. We would actually be able to communicate with them. So we wouldn't be pandas.
I mean, pandas, as in the case, like pandas are something that we take care of. We do all of the hard work.
Well, that means that they're evil. They would be putting fellow sentient beings in cages. Why would they do that?
No, not putting us literally in cages. It's doing all the stuff to take care of it. So providing us food, providing us shelter, doing all the hard work, doing all the scientific discovery.
Hey, that'd be great if they cure cancer and give us. Well, they would probably. If this really is going to happen, I think it's going to be a merger of humans. What I don't know what the transhumanists call it, but we would become. We're going to have technological implants in our brains, and it's not going to be one versus the other. It's going to be a merger of the two, I think, right?
Yep.
But the question is, are we going to catch that train, or are we going to die, and it's going to be our grandkids that are going to catch it?
Yeah, I think AI is probably going to come first before integration, because integration is going to be a lot harder to actually find a way to merge chips to computers. And that's why I think more Panda root. But I did want to get your thoughts on one video real quick on 2-Minute Papers, one of my favorite artificial intelligence research YouTube channels, and of the progress they've made recently in the past few months on AI. So I wanted to show this to you, if you don't mind, and hear your thoughts, because I'm definitely in the camp that AI is going to win. So,
dear fellow scholars,
can you hear that all right? Did you hear it?
Yep.
Okay.
This is 2-Minute Papers with Dr. Carol Jonay Fahir. I cannot tell you how excited I am by this paper. Wow. Today, you will see more incredible images generated by an AI. However, not from OpenAI, but from Google. Just a few months ago, OpenAI's image generator AI called DALL-E 2 took the world by storm. You could name almost anything. Cat Napoleon, a teddy bear on a skateboard on Times Square, a basketball player dunking as an explosion of a nebula, and it was able to create an appropriate image for it. However, there was one interesting thing about it. What do you think the prompt for this image must have been? Not easy, right? Well, it was a sign that says deep learning. Oh yes, this was one of the failure cases. Please remember this. Now, we always say that in research, do not look at where we are, always look at where we will be 2 more papers down the line. However, we didn't even make it 2 more papers down the line. We barely made 2 months down the line, and here it is. This is Google Research's incredible image generator AI, Imagen. This technique also looks at millions of image and text description pairs and learns what people mean when they say this is a guitar or this is a panda. But the magic happens here. Oh yes, it also learned how to combine these concepts together and how a panda would play a guitar. The frets and the strings seem a little wacky, but what do we know? This is not human engineering, this is panda engineering. Or robot engineering something for a panda. We are living crazy times indeed. So what is different here? Why do we need another image generator AI? Well, let's pop the hood and look inside. Oh yes, 2 things that will immediately make a difference come to mind. One.
So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that, because it seems like we're making significantly huge progress in AI, where it couldn't even recognize cats and dogs, and now it's able to generate images of abstract concepts.
Well, I mean, like I said, I'm skeptical of these Space Cadet Omni magazine things. I think it's I'm a patent attorney, I'm a copyright lawyer, and so I've heard these things about, who owns the copyright to these AI creations. To me, I think it's it's like saying we have self-driving cars because sometimes your car can put the brakes on and keep you from hitting another car. I don't think we have self-driving. I don't think we're anywhere near that. So I'm personally skeptical that we're anywhere near genuine artificial intelligence. I guess that's my perspective. I don't think we have it yet. I don't think we're anywhere near it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we're sometime in the future, but I'm pretty confident it's going to happen. But anyway, we've been going for about an hour, and I think it was a good conversation. Really appreciate you coming on. Do you want to give a shout out to where people can find more work if they're interested to research more of your stuff, more ideas?
Sure. Go to StephanKinsella.com, and my intellectual property work, where I explain why patent and copyright are harmful to the human race and should be abolished, is at c4sif.org, which is Center for the Study of Innovative Freedom.org.
Awesome. Great. Thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I will let you go. Have a nice day.
Thanks, man.